Hello, I'm Dr. Monique Morris, Executive Director of Grantmakers for Girls of Color, also known as G4GC. We are a philanthropic organization that works to advance conditions for girls, femmes, and gender-expansive youth who identify as Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, so that they can achieve equity and realize bold and just futures in the United States and beyond. G4GC is a founding partner of the 1 Billion for Black Girls campaign and administers the Black Girl Freedom Fund. Our goal is to organize within philanthropy and among donors to allocate $1 billion to Black girls over the next 10 years. However, we know that investment is also shaped by what happens among policymakers in the public sector. This conversation between Naomi Wadler and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is to locate Black girls in the policy discussion and invite all of us to more deeply explore how policy priorities in 2021 and beyond can help to co-create a future where Black girls are safe, thriving, and free. Please allow me to make some introductions. Naomi Wadler is a student activist with a mission to lift the voices of Black girls. She delivered a history-making speech in Washington, D.C. at the March for Our Lives event in 2018. In her speech, she highlighted Black girls and women as victims of gun violence. In addition to being an activist, she is also an aspiring journalist. Joining Naomi in this conversation is Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Congresswoman Pressley is an advocate, a policymaker, an activist, and a survivor. In November 2018, Congresswoman Pressley was elected to represent Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives, making her the first Black woman elected to Congress from Massachusetts. Please enjoy their discussion.
All right, well, let's go ahead, Naomi. Let's get right to it. I, really do appreciate the opportunity to sit at this virtual table with you, and I'm so grateful for your voice, your leadership, and the righteousness which you bring to every table and every stage and every room that you enter. And what I love so much about what you represent is just the power of youth voice. And that's certainly something, when it comes to Black girls, that we need to be doing a better job at centering the power, the lived experiences, and the voices of Black girls.
I think that, well, first of all, I'm very excited to have this conversation with you. I consider you a personal hero of mine. So it's a privilege to be able to sit down and talk through some of the stuff we stand for. I think that youth voices often get written off when it comes to conversations about either politics, voter registration, or really any kind of climate, social issues in general, and where adults are usually the average person at that kind of table. I think that being able to value the voices of our youth and being able to see past their numbers and see past their ages is something that's really important, because a lot of the topics that people discuss at these big fancy conferences are topics that, when decisions are made, are going to be affecting my generation and the generation that comes after me. So not including us in those kind of conversations, I think, is super harmful. When it comes to the erasure of Black women, I think what's super important is providing resources to majority Black schools and really helping Black girls and girls of color realize their full potential, without shutting them out of that conversation. Because for me, it's really important to be able to have conversations about my future and the future of other girls of color, because I think that that's often a conversation that we're not a part of, even though it centers around our futures.
Absolutely, and that's not something that just happened. What is culture? It's human behavior. And what incentivizes or creates a permission structure for human behavior, for that culture, policies. That's why I always say that policy as my love language, Naomi, because we know that policy has caused disproportionate and very precise hurt and harm and trauma for marginalized communities, and certainly for Black Americans, and certainly for Black women. And so now is the time, against the backdrop of this national reckoning on racial injustice, also when we have the first daughter of immigrants, first Black woman, first AAPI woman, serving as our vice president in some 30+ days, to really be unapologetic in our advocacy for the liberation of Black girls. You know, it's time to replace systems of oppression with liberation, and to replace generations, centuries of trauma with healing. And so, you know, in order for you to show up as your authentic, brilliant self, to have that self-agency and determination as an activist, as a journalist, I don't want any ceiling on your contribution. So for me, how I'm looking to get at that through lawmaking is through policies like that, which I developed with Dr. Monique W and 100+ Black and brown girls in Boston, and that is to combat the push-out crisis. We know that Black and brown girls are being criminalized, often simply just for how they show up in the world. And so we have to pass our Ending Push-Out Act to stop this growing of the school to confinement pathways. And I think something that goes hand in hand with that, just yesterday we were having a discussion about the Crown Act, right? Although that's not within our schools, that's about workplace discrimination and the role that that plays in Black women wearing their hair naturally or in protective hairstyles or whatever they want. But any system, any policy, any practice that is stomping out our ability to show up as our authentic selves, and unapologetically so, this is the time to actively dismantle.
I think when it comes to the liberation of girls of color, more specifically Black girls, I think a lot of that boils down to being able to see yourself in the media that you consume. Growing up and really enjoying reading and watching TV and really reading articles, consuming news, watching the news, not being able to see myself in a more positive light outside of the world of gun violence, when the only Black girls that I see on my TV are those who have passed away, and I don't see them getting any attention. That's such a negative, that provides such a negative spotlight for me to walk into. I think when you grow up and you can't see yourself in the things that you consume, you won't truly be able to realize your potential and become that. And you mentioned the school to prison pipeline. When it comes to demonizing Black women in schools and private schools for wearing those braids and walking into school, or for wearing the same uniform that her white counterpart is wearing, or for even talking back to a teacher. I mean, Black girls are 6 times more likely to be suspended or expelled than their white counterparts. I think that adverse discipline in schools, along with the demonization of Black girls in the places where they're supposed to feel safe and where they're supposed to feel like they can speak out in class, where they're supposed to feel like they can ask questions, when we're restricted and we feel like we can't do that, for fear that we'll be taken another way, I think that really contributes to us ending up in confinement and us not realizing that we can excel past where we started.
Absolutely. I mean, that was very accurate of exactly what has been going on. And, you know, when I said we're being criminalized simply for how we show up in the world, you know, this is why we need to end the push-out crisis and pass the End Push-Out Act, and why we need restorative justice practices, trauma-informed practices, learning communities that, and environments that are safe. And if you're wearing the same uniform every single day, one, you shouldn't be criminalized because it looks differently on your body. And if there are other codes of conduct or protocol standards around attire, often, you know, we've heard of girls being asked who've been suspended or had disciplinary action and been punished when they were wearing what they were wearing because they didn't have access to a laundromat, you know, to a washer and to a dryer. And so it's so important that we have learning environments that are safe and nurturing, and where people are trauma informed, and educators will ask a child, you know, what happened to you instead of what's wrong with you. And so many of these policies right now that on their face appear to be neutral, we know have a disparate impact on Black girls in particular. And that's everything from dress code, code of conduct, and the like. We're just really continue to treat trauma with more trauma. The other bill that I've introduced that I think is important, because I keep saying, for those that feel very proud of their allyship in the form of a hashtag or a t-shirt or a like or a retweet, that against this national reckoning on racial injustice, if we're going to affirm that Black Lives Matter, if we're going to do the work of the freedom, the liberation of Black girls, the only thing that matters are policies and budgets. And so in addition to ending the push-out crisis and passing the End Push-Out Act, in addition to passing the Crown Act, we should also be passing legislation that I've introduced called counseling, not criminalization. Naomi, I don't know if you know, and I know you won't be surprised to hear this, but the federal government has spent $1 billion with a B over the last 2 decades to grow our school police force to about 46,000 people strong. Meanwhile, as you well know, and I hope you'll speak more to this as your experience and what your peers experience, our young people don't even have equitable access in every school to a school nurse, a social worker, a guidance counselor, things that we know that are proven in supporting young people, not only in their health and their wellness, but in their readiness to learn. So can you speak a little bit just about, from a policy standpoint, why you see something like this as being impactful when it comes to those socio-emotional wellness supports?
I can. I think that criminalizing our youth within schools, whether it's the first thing you see when you walk into your neighborhood school is a guy with a gun standing there checking people's backpacks, that can be so incredibly harmful. And I think it could be so beneficial to me and my peers and the kids who experience stuff like that. I mean, I have the privilege of going to a school where I don't really have to worry about those visuals every day. Where I have access to a school counselor and a school nurse, and where I have those resources, but I can recognize that not everyone does, and it's not fair for me to be able to not worry about my safety at school, or I don't have to worry about my backpack being checked because someone thinks I look suspicious, but other kids do. So really, especially in public schools, where there might be one counselor every 2,000 kids, that's preposterous and ridiculous. And I think that mental health is something that should be catered to a lot more in schools. Really having the ability to talk to someone outside of your social circle, outside of your family, I think can be super beneficial, because I know that not a lot of kids have places at home where an adult that they can go to, a guardian that they can talk to about their issues, their self-worth, their identity, how they feel within their skin. So being able to have someone in your school who's trained and who can talk to you about that, I think is really important. I see it a lot, especially with girls of color. I mean, I go to a predominantly white school, and so the fact that the counselor at my school is Black is really cool to me. Being able to see myself in a woman who's there to help me and to help other people where I don't often see myself. I think that counseling and implementing those mental health resources within schools is really important, especially in public schools where they're often not prominent.
Naomi, I find that the rare times that I've had the blessing of being in your company, which has always been virtually, unfortunately, so I hope once the pandemic is behind us, that will change. We'll be talking about, some of the most painful, sobering things, but I can't stop smiling whenever I'm listening to you, because you are just the manifestation of so many prayers, of so many tears, of so much labor. You are just brilliant, and you're just these tiny shoulders. You've been carrying so much weight, and you do it with such grace and such conviction, and we just appreciate you. Queen, thank you. Queen Scholar. I think you could be the Secretary of Education right now. I need to make a phone call. But while we are just, staying in the space of, speaking about freedom and this is about investment too. So when I said, what is culture? It's human behavior. How do you change human behavior? You incentivize it, and one way with which you incentivize it and create a permission structure for good or for bad is through lawmaking. And so that also is about the power of what we call the purse, and it's the investments that we make in a fund like this, like the Black Girl Freedom Fund. And Black girls are certainly worth that investment. And for so long have been left out of the conversation and not centered in our policies. And so that's going to change, and that's going to change because of the work of Dr. Monique Morris. It's going to change because of the Black Girl Freedom Fund. It's going to change because of you, Naomi. And just we were talking about school, and so I don't want to leave out of that as we talk about freedom and school, student debt, which right now is not anything that you have to worry about. But when you were speaking earlier about young people playing more of a role in policy shaping and in the defining of our world, because you will inherit the world that we're shaping right now, which as a sidebar is actually why I also introduced a federal amendment to lower the voting age in federal elections to 16. Because the young people that I know, like you, have a fluency and an acumen about policy that, you know, belies people that are many years your senior who are already eligible to vote. The young people that I know, if the best gift that you can give a child is a stable adult, many of them don't have a stable adult. Households have been so destabilized, so many families were already on the margins pre-pandemic. And we know that that hardship, those mental health challenges, that hurt has only been exacerbated in this moment. And so as we, you know, chart a new path, and in a moment I'm going to ask you about what it means to have Madam Vice President-elect Kamala Harris about to take office, what that means, you know, to you and for all of us. But I don't want us to lose sight of other ways that we achieve freedom, and that is not only being in learning environments where you can show up as your authentic, unapologetic self, exactly as you show up in the world, but also economic justice. And that's why I think it's so critical that we tackle this student debt crisis. This is a $1.6 trillion crisis. Again, I've already spoken to and enumerated all the ways in which families have been destabilized. And this is a racial justice issue because Black students borrow more and default more. 85% of Black student borrowers had no choice but to take out loans because laws have stood in the way of Black families building generational wealth. Black students are 5 times more likely to default than their white peers. And that impacts your credit, and that credit score is a determinant for everything else in your life. And so one of the things we're pushing for right now is the canceling of student debt. I see this as like a restorative justice issue, a racial justice issue. The average borrower has about $30,000 worth of debt. And we just need to cancel that. You know, those are funds that could be used to build wealth and home equity by purchasing a home, funds that could be used to invest in yourself, to pursue entrepreneurial endeavors, to start your own business. And I'd love to hear from you, Naomi, if you've heard from any of your peers, you know, I don't want to go to school because I don't want to have debt, or if their fears about that have in any way informed their aspirations, you know, for their future. And talk a little bit about what the impact has been for you and your peers this pandemic. And again, just underscoring why we need those to make those investments in mental health supports.
I definitely think that the pandemic has taken a toll on so many people. I mean, staying at home all day, your parents being unemployed, you being unemployed yourself. I mean, it's a really stressful situation. So as we circle back around to mental health resources in schools, at rec centers, and really at places where people come and form communities, I think that's so incredibly important. And being able to, as you said, show up as your authentic, unapologetic self. You need to be able to talk about your emotions, your feelings, your problems, your issues, and be able to work through that so that you can show up as your authentic self, so that you're not bottling all of this pain and all of this confusion inside of you in a place where you're supposed to be able to be open and curious. I think that money has informed a lot of my friends' decisions about what they want to do with their life. I mean, I've had people say that they don't necessarily want to go to college because they don't want to have to spend the rest of their life paying off debt, which is something they could be using to further their career, further something else. And I think I'm a pretty firm believer that we shouldn't have to pay for quality of education. And while I think that that's probably not something that's going to change in a really long time, I mean, fixing, I think it's a goal of mine to create a world where people can get a quality education and where college isn't as expensive and they don't really have to worry about their family's income when deciding what they want to do with their lives. And you asked me how I felt. about Kamala Harris being
Yeah.
elected into office. I talked a little bit in the beginning about not being able to see myself in the books I read, the movies I watched, or the politics that I consumed, but being able to see a girl who looks like me ascend into the office, one of the highest offices that a Black woman has been in, is so incredibly important to me. And I think it's so important to the younger kids who are growing up, the kids who are just born, who are going to grow up um, in a nation where they can look and see themselves in the Vice President of the United States. As I said before, if you can't see yourself in someone else, you won't be able to become who you want to be. So being able to see myself and having younger girls be able to see themselves in someone who is a huge role model of mine, I think that it's very important.
Agreed. And what does that signal for you in terms of, do you think that that means that there's a shift occurring? You know, the fact that there is this Black Girl Freedom Fund, and that we're championing this call to, you know, invest in Black girls and their families. What does this shift mean to you? What does that represent? What does it feel like? And what do you think the impact of that will be?
To me, I see this country possibly living up to its full potential, whether it's the criminal justice system, which is completely flawed, or its politics in general. I see us implementing changes in ways that into marginalized communities where they haven't been before. Seeing people investing in Black girls and their families really signals to me that this country may get better, may go farther for the better. I think that it's really hard. I think that under the Trump administration, being able to say out loud and unapologetically, I am a racist, or I think marginalized communities do not deserve rights. I mean, what I'm saying sounds completely preposterous, but people have become more comfortable saying that out loud and showing their faces and really owning up to that belief system because our president has said those things and is comfortable saying those things. So under the Biden administration, I hope that becomes less normalized. And I hope that I think it signals for me a new birthing of America.
Let's certainly hope so. You know, I do think, you know, Reverend Barber talks often about this reckoning requiring of us a reconstruction, a third reconstruction. So this is the opportunity to rebuild, because we don't want to have a recovery, and we need a just and equitable recovery from the pandemic, both in our public health response and distribution of a vaccine, in our economic recovery, but we don't want to recover to an unjust status quo normal, right? We do want to be intentionally charting a brighter path and a more just future. So I know I'm certainly feeling hopeful. And, you know, one of the things that I've seen an evolution in, as we see a revolution in the people, that usually begins with language. So I've seen, you know, a lot more people centering equity, centering justice, centering Black girls. And in discussions of equity, I'm always challenging myself, and I think that's the work of equity, to think about who isn't around the table. You know, so any thoughts on Black girls and gender expansive youth that we need to listen to and that we should be taking a lead from? I don't know if there's any particular people or organizations, you know, that immediately come to mind for you, but want to make sure that we continue to be intentional in bringing folks in.
I often collaborate with the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality. And I was previously a member of their board, which was made up of younger Black girls. And we got to create content, showcase stories. I got to write an article for the university website, which is something that I had never done before. And it really offers Black girls platforms to be able to share their art and share their stories. And so I think that if we can be intentional in really showcasing and following the younger Black women, I think that that's so important, because we often have conversations. I'm often having conversations with adults about race, and those conversations are going to affect my kids. They're going to affect me and my generation, and the future generations aren't included in those conversations, as I said towards the very beginning, which is ridiculous, because it's our lives that we're talking about and it's our futures that we're talking about. So if we can support Georgetown and their board for poverty and inequality, and other places that really provide mental health resources like Safe Shores DC, which provides a place for kids who have been victims of violent crimes, specifically kids of color, to go and really build a community. Places where people can congregate and share ideas and showcase art and really come together. I think that's all places like that we should be supporting.
Yeah, I love your lifting up art and the necessity of that and the role that it plays, in the revolution, in the work of liberation, of freedom. I also love your lifting up the power of storytelling and journalism. That is so critical. In order for us to change policies, we have to change hearts and minds first. And how we accomplish that is always history has shown improved through storytelling and through movement building. One of the things, as I said, is people are now more used to centering equity and thinking about, okay, who isn't around the table and who do I need to include? Earlier this year, we were working with a young Black girl, Grace, out of Michigan, and you supported that case as well, which really just spoke to the intersection of, it was a very punitive response to her not in the midst of COVID, doing her homework, right? And then she was incarcerated. And that was really at the intersection of both disability justice, of racial justice, of gender justice. And so any thoughts on how we can be more inclusive? Because I do want, Black girls and gender expansive roles and, Black girls that are disabled, Black girls that are queer, every single iteration that when we're fighting for liberation, that they feel seen and included. So what are your thoughts on how we can do a better job at that?
I think what I try to do and what a lot of people should try to do is really sit back and support POC as they lift up their voices and speak on their experiences. Because while I can speak to being a Black girl in the United States, I can't speak to being a Black girl and being disabled, or being a Black girl and being queer, or being a Black girl being in any other box. So why should I be the one to step up and speak about that when there are plenty of other Black girls that can share their experiences and speak authentically on those topics? I think that a lot of activism nowadays is hashtags and stuff on Twitter and all of that, and it's in large part performative, and I think that feminism in its at its core is for white women, because a lot of it is not intersectional whatsoever, and white feminism really is the thing that people think about when they think of activism. But when I think of Susan B. Anthony, I don't think of a woman who didn't want Black women to have the right to vote, but that's who she was. And Black women were the last to get their right to vote, but that's not something that we're taught in schools. That's not something, I think the whitewashing of history in schools is also a really important topic. But while sitting back and giving voice to those who have different experiences from our own, I think that's really how we can be the most inclusive.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. So we have to pull folks in and then actively listen. And so when you think about how we realize Black girl freedom, how we replace oppression with liberation, how we replace trauma with healing, what would a $1 billion investment look like to you? I'll give you my wish list in a second, but where would you want to see $1 billion invested in getting us closer to the full freedom and emancipation of Black girls?
That's a really big question.
Well, you don't have to be granular. You could just talk top lines, yeah. Big buckets. Well, I'll start.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a lot of money to think about going.
I know. And you know what though? The thing is that I think we've been so conditioned to accepting these sort of unjust binary choices and this scarcity mindset, that there isn't enough, or we're not important enough or worthy enough. And so we have accepted these sort of unjust binary policy and budgetary choices. But again, if we can invest $1 billion to grow our school police to 46,000 people, then we can make the investment for a school nurse, a social worker, and a guidance counselor, right? And so when I think of a $1 billion investment, I think about everything from scholarships to support Black girls and, you know, their families. And I do agree with you, education, you know, should not be an expense that is incurred, but until we get there. So I think about, you know, investments in that ways, scholarships to cover the cost of college. I think about, you know, what that would mean. You know, the vaccine was developed by a Black woman, a 34-year-old Black woman. And so, you know, making that investment in education could very well lead to the next great cure or the next vice president and eventually, you know, president, you know, so those are worthwhile investments. I think about entrepreneurialism. You know, Black folks have always been creative and entrepreneurial, but we haven't always had the personal resourcing, and then because of discriminatory lending, haven't been invested in that way. So I would want to see that some of that $1 billion invested in our small business, in grants to support Black girls in becoming entrepreneurs and learning, you know, how to capitalize on their gifts, you know, and how to build wealth. And of course, I would love for us to invest in all of those things that build an ecosystem where Black girls can thrive. So how do we radically imagine what a healthy and safe community really looks like? That's investing in housing. You know, that's you know, more green space. It's combating and dismantling food apartheid systems. It's so investing in anything that creates an ecosystem where we can thrive. And then the last thing, and I think the most important, is investing in community-based, proven grassroots organizations, like investing in movement building. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would not have been elected if it were not for you. There would be no Pennsylvania. There'd be no Pennsylvania without Philadelphia. There would be no Georgia without Atlanta. No Michigan without Detroit. No Wisconsin victory without Michigan. And that is such a testament to the labor, to the work that has been happening on the ground and in community, not just for this cycle, but for decades. And so we have to start investing in those organizations. So those are some of my ideas. But I get what you're coming from. It's a lot to process because we're used to being under-resourced and over-criminalized and over-policed, you know, not to have what we really need and deserve. So, all right. Well, I gave you some time to think about it there. I drug it out as long as I could. Do you have any thoughts, Naomi, before we wrap, on how you'd like to see that $1 billion that would get us closer to Black girl freedom?
I think I'd like to see $1 billion equally distributed through community grassroots organizations and education, the education system, scholarships, like you said, because I think that the education system, as flawed as it is really who shapes our next generations and shapes the next policy makers, the next lawmakers, the next lawyers, the next doctors. So whether it's Black girls or girls of color who want to get into STEM, or it's Black girls who want to get into journalism, I think that providing schools with equitable resources is one of the most important things we can be doing.
Yes, absolutely. I'm just going to give it all to Naomi. Let's raise this money and give it to Naomi. I have full confidence that she will make the most righteous investments and that we're all going to get free. So thank you, Naomi. I appreciate you.
Thank you.